Chapter 2. It has been 4 days since I last went to school. My saga has become the talk of the town, and I just felt like vanishing into thin air. My friends were afraid of coming to our house after somebody told them that my father threatened to beat the hell out of them if they attempted to advise or help me disobey him. After dinner, I told Papa I would return to school unless the enslaver, Mr. Eddie Best, came with his people to collect their merchandise. Those sarcastic words seemed like consent, and he quickly nodded in approval. My father was unaware that the devil had set up a workshop in my mind and that something sinister was brewing. Anything I do in the upcoming days will be a bonus towards my freedom, as it has become evident that my father has brought over the rest of the family. My mother was so scared of being tagged rebellious. My brothers saw it as an opportunity to escape their present misery and step into a brighter future, as promised by Mr. Eddie Best. One thing they had yet to ask so far is what precisely this presumed in-law does for a living. In his words, they only had to own a fleet of cars, which blinds their eyes and renders their mind redundant. I woke up early, dressed up and left for school as far as my family was concerned. I walked past my school and headed straight to the motor park for Abakaliki. My mind was in turmoil as I walked faster to meet up with the early morning buses. I kept meditating on how to plead my case and request her prompt intervention by talking sense into my father's head or taking me as her house help. I was determined to locate Mrs. Promise at all costs, as she remained the only stone so far unturned in my attempt to stop this unhealthy and illegal human trafficking. I finally arrived at the park and went to inquire when the bus for Abakaliki was due to leave, and luckily they pointed to a bus that was already half filled. I pulled up my purse from my school bag to pay the fare, but a hand held mine from behind and whispered to my ears, "Before you I was." I almost froze to death because it was the unmistakable voice of my father. The shock of being caught attempting a solitary elopement, or should I call it an escape from tyranny, sent waves of shock to my inner heart. I knew that the consequences of my actions might end up in something more than a severe beating. All that mattered to me now was running away so fast as I could, and I counted it all joy in every possible attempt to wangle my way out. "How do you want us to handle the situation?" he asked. "I advise that you quietly come with me to avoid making a scene in the motor park. Whichever one you prefer is fine by me," he concluded. I knew he meant every bit of what he said. His usual self would have landed me a dirty slap in my face, but he caught up with me at the park without minding what anybody will say. His justification would have been, "It's none of anybody's business what I do with my daughter." I quietly complied as my enslaved person would do on seeing the master with the rod, chains and whip. I followed him like a sheep to the slaughter. As we walked home, I expected the first slap to come when we walked away from the public eye, but that didn't happen. He cradled my hand and asked, "What made you think that I was a fool? What makes you and your mother think I will allow a strange woman to decide what happens in my home?" I could not and did not respond to those questions because I knew that nothing I said would justify my action before his furious and greedy heart. We arrived home, and I noticed the surprise on my mother's face. She looked like a rat caught suddenly in a trap, as fear and worry were visible all over her face. If I had confided in her before embarking on this adventure, I would have felt betrayed. But this was not the case. I felt pity for myself, not because of the beating that might follow, but for my failed adventure and inability to take my case to Auntie Promise. He summoned Mama for a meeting and invited all my siblings still at home to join the proceedings. I do not know him to be democratic, so my expectations from this sudden meeting were pessimistic. Probably he wants them to help him with the beating. His first warning went to Mama, who, according to him, must have been the brain behind my going to Abakaliki to wash our dirty family linings in public. He then turned to my sister and accused her of complicity in this saga. I'm going the extra mile to engage this family with an in-law who I believe will become our destiny helper. And I get this disdain and mistrust. He paused and looked around as if in search of consensus or to verify if his threat was making the desired effect. Then he continued with his rhetoric. Your younger brother is already reaping the fruit of this venture. And instead of teaming up with me, you are doing everything possible to disgrace me and make me a public laughingstock. You know for sure what would have been the outcome of what you just did. But there is this Igbo proverb that says, you don't beat a child the day he spills palm oil, but the day he spills the remnant wastewater, because it signifies that he now knows the difference. He paused again to savor the absolute silence that had taken over the entire atmosphere. No one uttered a word. We're all in this venture together, independent of who is in favor or against my presumed wicked thoughts. As my brother described my actions the other day, looking at my mother, he said, everybody's thoughts are right in his mind and understanding. To the unknowing, it might seem that I'm only after my gains because of the gifts and cash I received the other day. But I also hope to have him put you back to school once you get to Lagos. I may be wrong, he said, but if I am right. Mamo wept bitterly, but no one attempted to console her for fear of being counted as an accomplice by my father, who often accused her wrongly and offered no apology, even when he found that he was wrong. Despite being angered by her silence and inaction, I felt terrible, knowing she wasn't even aware of my plans to escape to Abakaliki that day. I purposely didn't want to share my projects with her because the last time I did, she filled my head with many excuses about why I shouldn't try them. At the end of the meeting, it shocked me that Papa didn't raise his voice or make any allusion to beating me. Nothing is worse than a man not being able to keep his word, especially in matters of this nature. He pleaded with Mamao and my siblings to help him talk to me. The family tension died down, and I became the only opposition to what now seems to be a family adventure or speculation if we desire to put square pegs in square holes. I could not return to school, though I did not intend to, because my story had gone viral. The previous Sunday, a nearby church priest used my situation to preach. He admonished parents to avoid pushing their daughters into marriage for their selfish economic convenience. I heard that he mentioned my father's name during their sermon. It was a Friday morning, and my father's friend who connected him to Mr. Eddie came to confer with him and confirmed that Eddie Best and his family will return the next day, Saturday. I was eavesdropping from my room and heard my father admonishing him to avoid repeating the scenario that played out last week. The man who, as tradition demands, is also from our village, attempted to convince my father that the boys of nowadays no longer wish to be tied to the same old-time religion and traditions. Sometimes, he concluded, you must close an eye and let go. I understand your perspective, my father reiterated, but I do not want to play to the gallery. Once beaten, twice shy. What transpired between my brother and me last time should not repeat itself. My usual self would have taken a stand against my brother, but not in the face of an undisputed truth and infringed tradition. Our traditions risk extinction if we do nothing to ensure we correctly transmit them to our children. There must be a limit to where we can keep an eye closed, or we risk waking up one day to discover that we have become blindfolded. Relax, my good friend. Can assure you that his father and some elders will come with them this time, and your brother will have no room for objection. Just leave that to me. One more thing, my father said. My brother made some specific observations that need urgent attention. We need to carry out at least some fact findings about our son-in-law's family to avoid committing some irreversible sacrilege or giving our daughter in marriage to a family of outcasts or mentally afflicted generations. As our people say, we will not eat an antelope with pronounced scrotal elephantiasis because of meat scarcity. Anya manjiri maka oko anu ta ngada daribi. As my father ended his dialogue with the man, I respected him to mention my attempts for escape from home, but he didn't. I presumed he was hiding his predicaments while attempting to reassure the man that all was well and that he was in absolute control of the situation. He stood up and saw him off to the door. My mother tried very hard to make me follow a particular thought pattern. Sitting silently in my room, I realized I was conforming to their logic rather than standing my ground in opposition to these ill-fated sacrifice. I started fantasizing about how I would have to carry the glass of palm wine and kneel before him as a sign of agreement to be his wife. I imagined riding alongside him in that fantastic SUV back to Onitsha and then to Lagos. I even imagined myself stepping into his big house in Lagos and learning to cook with a gas cooker instead of firewood, as I've seen my mother do all her life. Then I had a flashback to a few days ago when Mamo recounted her marriage experience. She told me how her father gave her out in marriage when she was 2 years younger than me, and how it took her time and patience to accept my father as her husband. She said that moving into her new home was a drama. She recalled escaping and returning to her mother's hut the first night my father attempted to sleep with her. These thoughts sent waves of shivers down my spine. Mamo had stressed that my case was a bit different. She emphasized that my size and maturity had contributed immensely to making my father believe I was ripe for marriage. She tried to convince me that my father was desperately worried about me getting pregnant at home, as had been the case with some young girls in the village who brought shame and reproach to their families. How on earth was she relating such matters to me? I asked myself. Where is the connection? I had always kept the needed distance from boys and never had a boyfriend. I strongly felt she was lying to cover up her inability to oppose my father's selfishness. My faith in God's ability to save me from these embarrassments had watered down, and it became difficult for me to pray. I've been planning on a last resort, but confusion prevails over my reasoning. That I was still under 16 didn't matter to anyone. Finally, my heart ministered to me, and suddenly, my sense of escape to freedom came alive again. The priest who used my case to preach will gladly help my situation. I leaped from my bed like I had just discovered a sea route to heaven. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and everyone was deeply asleep. I thought of how I would tiptoe to the entrance door with a double bolt and a center key. I silently picked up a few clothes and stuffed them in my school bag. In a flash, I thought it would be safer to wear 4 undies, put on all the clothes, and walk away without my school bag. If my father caught me, I would claim I was going to the toilet, since we had none inside the house. I picked up my torchlight, but looking out the window, I saw a full moon outside. That helped ease my fears of trekking to the priest's parish home, just a few minutes' walk from the church cemetery. I knew I had to run as fast as possible to cross the cemetery, but the hope of gaining my freedom was much more significant than my fears. I slowly opened my door, tiptoed to the front door, unbolted the top bolt, and then the second successfully. The door wouldn't open even after I quickly turned the knob. I pulled harder, and I realized the door was locked. Whoever locked it removed the key as well. My last chance of escape slowly faded away at the 11th hour. As I tried to push back to the bolt and walk back to my room, I heard the door of my father's room opening, and my heart jumped into my mouth. I tried very hard to convince my father that I felt pressed and needed to go to the toilet, but he smiled, looking at me from head to toe. I felt idiotic for telling such a blatant lie. I was dressed and wore my sneakers, which I chose purposely in anticipation of a race across the cemetery. I didn't look like one who woke up from sleep and needed to use the toilet. Once again, my father showed an unusual calmness that was not part of his nature. He watched as I slowly walked back to my room, saying, I know you think I'm stupid, or instead that you're more intelligent, but I think I know more than the devil in you. He flashed the keys, which he held in his hands, and gently asked me to go back to sleep. I entered my room, closed the door, and crawled into my bed. The scene of Macbeth was all I could remember, as the infamous statement, sleep no more for Adaeze, as mothers sleep, kept racing through my mind. I couldn't even cry, because I was subconsciously congratulating myself for my many attempts to escape to freedom without success. I watched the ceiling all night and frequently looked out the window, expecting daybreak at the second cock crow. No one bothered to wake me up after I fell asleep at dawn. When I finally turned over in my bed, I opened my eyes slowly because the sun was shining directly on my face. The alarm clock was on my table. It was almost 10 o'clock in the morning. I must have died and returned to life without knowing it. I guess Papa must have told them about our night encounter. And who knows if any of them found the courage to laugh out loud. As I joined my mother in the kitchen, some leftover breakfast awaited me. She had already started preparing the ingredients for stew and soup with two of her co-wives, as my uncle's wives fondly called each other. She informed me that our in-laws will arrive earlier and protocols will have to be briefed to ensure they took their wives home today. She looked warmly at me as if to say, thank God you slept till late because a long day awaits you. As expected, they arrived before midday and headed to my maternal grandfather's home to perform the required traditional rites. They also stopped to see some people listed as stakeholders in matters of matrimony of my father's daughters. They returned 2 hours later, just as our relatives were trickling in to answer the call, as announced by the errand man my father used to coordinate this occasion. His elder brother finally arrived, and the introductory session started. Edibest had complied with my uncle's request by bringing his father and a few elders along. They spoke well in line with the Igbo traditions, which are correlated in every clime and clan of Igbo land. In his welcome speech, my father's brother recounted what transpired the last time they came and stressed that the walkouts he staged the previous time took place because there was no way he could have given away one of his daughters to a stranger in the company of unknown youths. He paused, looked around to ensure every ear was attentive, and continued. That would have been a sacrilege over which our ancestors would not have closed 2 eyes at our stupidity. Thank you once again for your understanding and cooperation. I could notice the satisfaction on my father's face, who immediately called upon my mother to bring forth her daughter to greet our guests. They observed all the other regular protocols, including the traditional payment of bride price. They used a bunch of broomsticks to argue and agree on the bride price, as was the norm with our tradition. Negotiations continued unabated by removing and adding until they reached a compromise and monetized the agreed sum. They concluded the negotiations for the general wine carrying, which will take place the next 4 market days. They also decided to do it by proxy, since we would have returned to Lagos, but with the full participation of both families as agreed upon unanimously.